All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jen LaBarbera. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm the Education and Advocacy Manager here at San Diego Pride. It is my pleasure to introduce to y'all Joyce Gabiola. Joyce uses they, them pronouns and is the new head archivist as of about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, at Lambda Archives of San Diego. Those of you who know me know that that is my old haunt as well. So before they moved to LA, where they got their doctorate at UCLA in Information and Archival Studies, Joyce earned their master's in Library and Information Science with a concentration in archives management at Simmons University in Boston. And Joyce approaches archives with the understanding that archives are ultimately about people, not materials and ownership. Additionally, Joyce is one of the co-creators and inaugural editors for Uproot, a new publication/media space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to share research and meditations on knowledge, systems, experiences, and or ways of navigating and being in libraries, archives, and other information environments, such as social media. Uproot is an intervention that endeavors to unapologetically center and uplift the works of BIPOC exclusively. I really just love Joyce's resume. So when they are not deep in the world of archives, they enjoy finding hidden gems in used bookstores when, we're not in the middle of a pandemic, playing board games like backgammon, like a grandpa, and making their 10-month-old theyby laugh hysterically. So welcome, Joyce.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Yes, like a grandpa. That was awesome. Yeah, if anyone is down with backgammon, let me know for the future. Thank you. But yes, thank you, Jen, for that introduction, and immense thanks to San Diego Pride for inviting me to do this. I'm happy to be with all of y'all in this virtual space, and I definitely look forward to our conversation. And I'll add that since Jen was the previous head archivist of Lambda Archives, it's even more awesome to be here and do this. And I'll just add a little note that if you ever see me kind of look this way, and I smirk or smile, it's because I have rotating pictures of my baby over here because I need some comfort. Okay, so FYI.
That is adorable. If you want to throw the baby in to the spring at some point, feel free as well. So we're gonna go through a series of questions that we've compiled and have been submitted. And if we have time at the end, if y'all have questions that you want to ask of Joyce, of the archives overall, please feel free to drop that in the comments on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you are watching. And we'll try to get to those comments or questions if we can as well. So first, to get started, first things first, you literally just started at Lambda Archives a minute ago. So how are you settling into your new job as head archivist? How are you settling into San Diego? How has it been?
Yeah, let's see. I'm settling in just fine, or as much as you can expect during a pandemic, right? But what's good is that most of the time I'm pretty much the only person archives, so that really helps. But the board members, particularly Nicole Verdes, who's the board president, has been really awesome and supportive in words and in action. So it's not something I'm used to in the past 5-6 years. So it's just really, really, really awesome. And as far as settling into San Diego, unfortunately, we don't get to explore that much. It's pretty much home and Lambda Archives and Plumeria. Oh, Plumeria, I love you. But yeah, let's be honest. I'll be honest with you. I was glad to leave Los Angeles. I just wanted to a new place, and it's really especially awesome to be in San Diego. It's just seems more chill and just more comforting. So I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm glad that I'm specifically here with y'all.
Yes. Yeah, I like to refer to San Diego as LA's tomboy little sister, where no one wants to admit that the tomboy little sister is actually far cooler than like the like very glam older sister. But like we are actually the cooler. Sorry, LA, I love you. I guess. So yeah. So tell us like about yourself. What attracted you to building a career as an archivist? I think, you know, just as for those folks that are not super familiar with like archives or library land or like that, this field in general, most people think of archivists, right, as like as old white men who don't like people and therefore don't ever want to, you know, like their little dusty basement archives, which are never dusty, for the record. If they're dusty, but right, just dispelling myths about archivists, right? But so what we usually see as archivists is we see older white folks usually that are kind of our archetype of the archivist. So what made you, as not any of those things, attracted to being an archivist as a career?
Yeah, you pretty much covered it very well there. Well, in thinking about this, I try to respond in a way that isn't like as an archivist, but more so I go back to, yeah, how did I get interested in history and archives? And it's growing up in Texas, in a Catholic household, Filipino family. And, you know, I was a bit of a pudgy kid and just brown. And at the time I was identifying as gay. So I didn't see representations of myself anywhere, right? Like not just in my physical environment, within my family, extended family, but at school, in media, books and movies, films, and also, you know, in my classrooms, with my teachers, with my professors. So I wanted to be part of these efforts. I'm pretty sure, you know, folks way before me have started this work. But I wanted to contribute in a way to where, yes, we increase representation, but of folks of color, LGBT folks of color specifically, and but do it in a way that is coming from the community, I guess. Now, of course, community, you know, there are different ways to define it, and communities are complex, nuanced. But that is part of the reason why then I went into to pursue a master's degree and then eventually a PhD, was I really wanted to apply this critical lens to doing that, so that not only can I continue to be self-reflective of you know, the little bit of power that is afforded to archivists, because they are, you know, they do very much so have a say into building information, building knowledge. So I'm trying to sort of take this anti-racist lens to it. I'm trying to intervene the traditional, predominantly white, cis, hetero, patriarchal ways of doing within archives. But when I go back to like, how did I get into archives? It's just simply, I wanted to contribute to the historical record and make sure that folks of color are represented and described in a certain way that is intentional and meaningful for them, for us, and not through so much that white, cis, patriarchal lens. I don't want to be described by you know, an old white person who doesn't give any sort of time or effort to even knowing how I exist and how I navigate in the world. And of course, you know, my fellow colleagues, fellow archivists of color, students of color, just anyone in the community, because, you know, archives is very much so is still predominantly white. And yeah, some people have got to intervene, and I'm one of them.
So very glad that you are one of them. And yeah, I think people sometimes like miss or underestimate the importance of that description, of that the way that we are described and, you know, cataloged, right? Because that's what archives do, is they catalog people's lives, basically. And so having somebody from, and this is getting to a question I'm adding, sorry, so you did not prepare for this one, but is, right, like that is, it gets at that kind of what was part of the core of the research that I know you did while you were at UCLA on community archives, of the importance of communities describing themselves and telling our own stories. So if you can talk a little bit about the research that you did during your PhD and program, and kind of how that influenced, you know, how that will influence how you're gonna, you know, create some amazing stuff at Lambda Archives and kind of your career in general.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the research that I was part of a research team at UCLA, and we basically conducted focus groups at community-based archives across Southern California. Lambda Archives actually is one of them, and the team pretty much took a critical lens to the data that we collected, but from my perspective, as you know, as part of the research team, I have this, like, I'm an insider and I'm an outsider, right, to some of these communities and these particular archives, and so the whole time it was just like always reflecting on, you know, am I coming at this from this academic perspective where, or am I coming from it as just this person just happens to be queer, and just happens to be a person of color, Filipinx American, Asian American, and I'm in community with folks that are like me, but also not like me. It's just this, I'm trying to put, sort of be guided by what folks in the community are saying. And not so much to be guided by archival theory, although, you know, being in academia, I mean, I do need to be, but also doing that intervention there as well. One thing I'll say in particular, that one of the major things I took from that research experience was, you know, archives tends to be about, you know, power and ownership and just like taking, you know, and not so much giving back. And it's about diversifying collections and institutions that are designed, you know, again, for like, you know, dominant social locations, white folks and, you know, middle-class folks. And I'm trying to understand that, you know, folks in the communities, particularly communities of color, are using their agency to actually not, we're going to keep our stuff. We don't trust you. How can we trust you? And it's like, oh yeah, you're here, you're interested, but that's because you're interested in learning about us, but you're still going to use that information to advance your career, you know? And so I just kept thinking about that as someone in academia, like, am I doing that? And that's not what I want to do. So yeah, one of the main things coming from that research was that, you know, keeping or helping to, you know, support folks in communities to maintain that power over the stuff that, you know, that documents their lived experiences in their communities. It's like, y'all have been doing it. Lambda Archives is empowered by the community since its inception in the 80s. Like, you know, so yeah, sure, there are archival standards and, you know, we do want to make things accessible and discoverable, but we also have to think about the, you know, like ethical perspectives over it, because we don't want to do more acts of violence to folks. So, I need myself.
Yeah.
Okay, edit me.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I remember from my archives days, folks were so many other kind of archives people, like archivists from around the country and around the world were like, okay, well, but how do I get this marginalized community, insert marginalized community here, to trust us and give us their stuff? But that's the wrong question, right? It's not the question of like, how do I work to make you trust me? How do we build trust together? And maybe that ends up with me as an archivist holding and preserving the stuff of your history, but maybe it doesn't, right? And so, well, Lambda Archives is a community-based archive, and we are built by and for the LGBTQ community. I think there are still communities within that are not super well represented in our archives. So, I think I want to get to that, but first I'm going to add that as a question to ask in a second. But first, just kind of like the elevator speech of Lambda Archives, right? So you and I both know that it's a super important LGBTQ organization in San Diego, but it's often kind of the best kept secret, right? So if you can just kind of share a little bit about Lambda Archives, like where it is, what you do, for people who maybe have no idea that this even exists.
Yeah, sure. So Lambda Archives is located at 4545 Park Boulevard in University Heights. And fortunately, it's in the building of Diversionary Theater. So we're perpetually surrounded by creativity and awesome energy. So I recently described Lambda Archives as part of a bio I was writing for a journal article as a community-powered / community-empowered archival organization. A lot of times in like archival literature and like elsewhere, they're referred to as community-based archives. And so, yeah, that gives an idea of what kind of archives it is. But in describing it as a community-powered or community-empowered, it even more so, it just highlights the power behind communities to do this work. Y'all, I know, folks in communities know the complexities and the nuances of their communities and how it informs our present and will inform our future. So basically, Lambda Archives is an archives organization that preserves and collects and shares documents that or materials that document local history. And so hopefully I'm reflecting on my interview with the board of Lambda Archives, and one of their questions was about helping to like create Lambda Archives as a modern archive. And so it was like, well, what is a modern archive, right? And so what I did was basically frame that interview, and this is a large part of how I'm framing how I approach my work at Lambda Archives and archives in general, is through an anti-racist lens. I'm looking at what's happening right now, right? Yes, we're in this global pandemic. There are these global uprisings, and there's violence and police brutality, and it's affecting Black and Brown communities. And people think about archives as just about history, like what are they holding, and what can we find about history in our research. But I also think it's very much, there are other archivists who understand this as well, that archives are also about right now. What can we do as archivists, especially since we do impact the future. We also impact what's happening now. And so Lambda Archives working towards being a modern archive. We are looking at things, intervening in ways through an anti-racist lens, and trying to develop that lens. I just started doing anti-racist work in the past, 5-6 years. Also, since society, is continually changing, archivists have to reflect on that, right? And so even I say, oh, I'm doing anti-racist work, but I don't know everything. I won't say I'm an expert on anti-racist work, but I'm learning and reflecting and trying to be mindful and intentional about who and how I'm engaging folks, and to what extent am I highlighting their perspective and how they see their own communities, their groups, their families. And so Lambda Archives is an archives, but it's like working towards being a modern archive / anti-racist archive. And I'll also add that I have yet to delve into what an abolitionist approach to archives looks like and what that's about. So if anyone out there wants to be in conversation with me about that, that'd be great. Definitely got to learn about abolitionist approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think that's so real. And that's the thing that, I know that in my few years at Lambda Archives, I also tried to make sure that we were not just collecting, when people passed or when they were cleaning out their garages or attics, but also actively collecting those materials as things were happening, as protests were happening. Great, give us your signs. As the Pulse anniversary, like when Pulse happened, Hillcrest Business Association gave us this 5 huge boxes of the candles and the the teddy bears and the signs and the posters that were left at the Hillcrest Pride flag as part of the memorial. Not as a, hey, this is history that happened a million years ago. This is history that's happening right now. And I think that right now in our current moment, it's I think everybody knows that we are living through a very historic moment right now. This, all of the dumpster fire of 2020 is historic. We are living through such history, and I'm really glad to hear that Lambda and you are committed to collecting the now as well. And so that kind of brings me to what I'm going to come to the next question, which is the now. Given that we are socially distant, we are not gathering in person so much, if at all. And so usually, though, when people think about archives, they think about, the actual papers and binders and, God forbid, those sticky photo sheets and physical photos, right? And so, and those are not the only materials that are archival and are of archival value. So can you give us some examples of some kind of maybe unexpected materials that are currently in the collection, maybe from years ago, and maybe things that are of interest to be collected now?
Sure. I have not yet come across any food like a pancake. And I say that because an archivist at Harvard definitely came across that. And I was like, wow, a pancake. Okay, this is a tiny little pancake. Anyway, that's unexpected, I'd say. But so yeah, beyond paper and photos, there are presently, when you walk into the archives, there is a small exhibit, and what instantly may catch other folks' eyes, just as mine, was a denim jacket that has a bunch of buttons on it, and you just have to stop and just kind of see all the different buttons, from different events, the different expressions, and so there are things like that, not just photographs and papers of sorts. There are also plaques and trophies, I suppose, awards, and those take, in which, you know, some of them are like really cool, especially, you know, if it's something that, I mean, that you find meaningful. But it also takes up space. So it's just kind of like, you know, trying to be able to provide literal space for those kinds of materials, but also provide access to them. And let's see, there's also, well, there are definitely like larger, larger posters. I haven't seen any anything that was really odd. Jen, have you seen?
Nothing like super strange. But there's a lot of what is the kind of catch-all phrase of ephemera. So Doug Moore, who was is still with us, still around, is one of the founders of the Archives, and is also was also one of the founders of Interpride, which is actually having their World Conference this weekend. He collected a ton of different just like swag and ephemera, including like those weird little like plastic bullhorns that actually do literally nothing to amplify your sound, but they look cool. So there's those in there. There's like pennants and flags. There are a ton of banners from like over the years, like a bunch of vinyl banners. One of the things I love the most, I don't know if you've gotten to dig into it yet, but is the t-shirt collection and the button collections. Yes. Like those are my two. I loved those too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, you know, thinking about, you know, it would be interesting for folks out there who tuned in today. You know, I'd be really curious about learning about stuff that you've, you know, set aside that has been with you, you know, since you were a kid. You know, that stuff is archival. It can't be archival. And you know what? It's meaningful. A lot of folks think that there's, you know, it's like, I'm not important, or like, whatever I have to say, it doesn't have any meaning. But guess what? You're part of the community. Like, you're part of the community, and our community history is important to the historical record. But it's also, you know, meaningful and personal, and also impactful for folks to not only see, but engage with. And, you know, in looking at perhaps some document, you know, to know that there's other folks who are perhaps navigating certain difficulties or challenges, or, you know, attending certain events that were meaningful. But in that way, with engaging archival material, all of a sudden you kind of have this like community of like, I guess, engaging with archival material. It's powerful. If you haven't been to Lambda Archives, well, I can't invite you in right now, but definitely if it's Lambda Archives or it's another archives, it's like, I would invite you to like sit down and you know, really intentionally engage with some objects.
Yes. Yeah. And there is, you know, there's something about those materials, like the handling of those physical materials. Yes, the majority of our life is digital now. And I think that, you know, like, you know, I know Lambda continues to collect digital material as well. And, you know, 10, 20 years down the road, maybe that will hold the same kind of power that is the power that you can hold in your hands when you're like handling that archival object. But there is, not to get like too woo on everybody, but there is, there's something about the energetic value of archival material. I'm thinking specifically about Gary Cheatham's notebook. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Joyce, but it's the, and it was something that came to Lambda Archives, I know, by accident. I know I'm interviewing Joyce here, but I'm also just gonna like take the liberty to like tell some stories too. But so it came to Lambda Archives by accident very shortly before I started there. Auntie Helen's was cleaning out their basement and found this notebook. And they were like, this seems like it might be important, and gave it to Lambda. Within that notebook was what eventually turned into Auntie Helen's, but started as just Gary taking care of his friends who had contracted HIV and were getting sick and were eventually dying, and just little tasks and chores that he would do for them. So, and I don't recall any of their names because it's been a number of years since I've seen the notebook itself, but it's like this person's name, like Jerry. If he passes, don't call his mother, only call his sister. Do his laundry on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, especially, and God, even not even holding the notebook, but telling the story, I'm still getting like a little choked up. But as these folks passed, he would just cross a line through it. And in the beginning, he would write, rest in peace and the date. And then as you got further along into the notebook, it was just crossing it out. And like and you can kind of see and feel the exhaustion of having to, be the survivor in that case, be the survivor who's taking care of these other folks. And, and that's like one of those stories of our community. And that entire story is in just one notebook, like one piece of material that Gary probably didn't think was that important. Like it was just still in the basement of Auntie Helen's when they were moving some stuff. And it's just like the things that, the things that you think are so kind of rote and day to day can actually be like hella powerful.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that, Jen.
Yeah. It's my favorite story. And also still get choked up about it.
Sure.
Right. But that's our history, and that's our community, and we are resilient as hell. Like, and so I know that last week, Fernando put in their email, like the subject line of the weekly Pride email was "Not Our First Pandemic," and I know that the archives holds like a lot of stories about how San Diego's community came together during the AIDS pandemic, the HIV and AIDS pandemic, the height of it. And so, I think we are at this point where there's so many differences that are also like vital to recognize of like the differences between COVID-19 and AIDS. And there's also some similarities that I think we can probably draw some strength from. And so this is, we're all going through this pandemic. It's impacting the lives of everyone. And I know this is the question that you were like, I don't know, I don't really want to answer it, but here we are. Right. Like, so what are there stories that like maybe you found in the archives, or maybe you're seeing happening in the community that as the LGBTQ community is as a whole dealing with this pandemic, what stories have you heard that kind of help our community deal or cope with the current pandemic?
Yes. So I'll say like what I've been seeing, of course, it's informed by, at least within the circles and the networks that I'm engaging in and exposed to, are more like intentional gatherings, even though they're all virtual. It just seems like folks are simply wanting to be in each other's presence. Yes, we are in a pandemic, and there's like so much uncertainty and heaviness surrounding us always. And but then there's just these moments where folks are getting together intentionally and trying to just slow down. Like, let's put productivity and work and consuming information and consuming more information and just off to the side for a second, because we need to be real in this moment, in this space, and just actually, be with each other as, as friends, as even colleagues, family members. And so, yeah, I mean, with what you were talking about, that's so powerful that it's not our first pandemic. And so, folks in the community are like this is what we're doing. It's like, just this idea of coming together and supporting each other in all different ways. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I've been seeing that as well too, as the like just the importance of those connections, I think, is just really being driven home for a lot of folks. I think especially as so many of us are forced to not connect with anyone anymore, right? Because it's not safe. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that as well. So back to about the archives specifically. So a lot of folks might not know, but LGBTQ community members in San Diego County, Imperial County, and Northern Baja, California, can submit materials to the archives to be added to the collection. So like, what types of materials might you be looking for? Are you accepting donations now during COVID? What does that look like? Is there somewhere on the website maybe that has a list of items that are like archival? And yeah, like, tell us more about that process.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so community members can definitely submit materials. It doesn't have to be just organizations or public figures. The Lambda Archives is an archives of the LGBT community, and y'all are part of that. So different kinds of, we're not looking for anything in particular, at least right now, not right now. But if you do have any type, we received an inquiry recently about a banner, and yeah, we're definitely interested in it. But since Lambda Archives is closed for the remainder of the year, we're not physically like taking in any materials, but that doesn't mean we can't start that conversation, because there's it's not just about, oh yeah, give me your box or, these few materials and I'll put it off to the side and deal with it later. It's, part of the process before even the materials arrive at the archives. I'd like to really just have a conversation with folks, what is a little bit of the history of these materials. And, it's particularly if it's a single community member, what is it? What does this collection or what does this particular object mean to you? What do you envision for it? Not so much, is there research value to it, but what do you envision for it living in the archives? And I say living because, objects are dynamic. They, like Jen mentioned, I approach archives from a perspective that it's about people. And so it's not just preserving the materials. So what kind of material is it? How can we best, let's get rid of this red rot, all that's important, but it's also y'all's intentions that are important. So I'm curious, I'd be curious later if y'all would actually do look at your objects and be like, yeah, I was really intentional about, keeping this for this reason why. And I mean, bring those stories on. It's like, this is how I'd love to connect with y'all. So, but yes, unfortunately we can't, we're not taking any we're not accepting materials in yet, but definitely here for having those conversations about what do you have. And even if that relationship starts now and we have those conversations and the materials don't actually come in until like next year or, 5 years from now, it's just my intention of connecting with you and getting to know your purpose and what you envision for your collection.
Yeah, and that goes, I think that whole process and being so intentional about that process goes so much to what we were talking about earlier of, having that control over how these things are described, right? So if you are talking about this as like, here's this box of stuff, I'm going to just like peace out, bye. I have no idea why you put this. I'm thinking about things that I would put in mine, right? Which is like, the book Hope for the Butterflies, which has a really like deep meaning for me. But if I was the archivist who just got this random box from a queer community member that had this book in it, I'd be like, okay, but why, right? But if you tell me why, then I can put that into the description, and we can like, it can be that living material, right? Where it tells that story in a way that you want your story to be told, which I think is, and so having that, and honestly, it's like one of the most fun parts of being an archivist too, is that you get to like hear those stories from folks as well. Yeah. And then Rosa asked the question about geographically, are we looking for things from the San Diego area only, statewide, national, worldwide? What is the like geographical context of what you're looking for?
Sure. It's, I believe, my understanding that it is regional. So it's, San Diego County, Baja, California. But I'll also, throw in there for folks who, like I consider Texas home. Like a complicated relationship with Texas, but like that's where I grew up. That's where most of my family and most of my friends are long-time friends. And so Texas is my home. But so I'm just thinking that way. I know certainly folks who have perhaps left San Diego and are elsewhere and may never return, but they find that San Diego is their home and their materials can connect to San Diego. We should be open to starting those conversations with folks who are no longer physically living in San Diego, because again, those materials are part of San Diego LGBTQ history as well.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Right. And right, with San Diego being such a, and I'm blanking on the word for it, but like it's the place people come and then they leave, right? Like it's not there are so many folks who just like move here and then move away 5-10 years later. And so, being that kind of transitory place, right, means that I think the reach of Lambda Archives is probably a bit bigger than somewhere that's a little bit less transitory, right? And I know that Rosa is the director of the Imperial Valley LGBTQ Community Center, and so Imperial County is absolutely within the like kind of geographical boundaries of Lambda Archives, and if and when we're able to go out and do things again, Joyce, I did some really amazing. Lovely presentations with the IV Center, and hopefully you'll be able to once we can see humans again. They're Imperial Valley folks are queer folks in Imperial Valley are like a little something else. Like they're I feel like when you are LGBTQ in an environment that doesn't make it easy to be LGBTQ, you kind of have to often build this like stronger backbone. I find this I found this when I lived in the Midwest as well, and like those more conservative areas with feminists and other folks. Like you kind of you have to be a different breed of strong, right, and resilient, which is our community as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're starting to wrap up a smidge. So do you have, and I know that you've only been at Lambda Archives for, is it a month now? Where are we at?
Yeah, a month. A little over a month.
Yeah. So, right. So you've had a little bit of time to kind of get to know some of our history, some of our stories. Are there any San Diego LGBTQ history stories that particularly inspire you, or any other LGBTQ stories from like anywhere, any piece of history that is like super inspiring to you?
Yeah, well, I had the most amazing conversation with, so perhaps some of y'all know, with partners Meredith Facina and Ellen Holzman, who, oh my gosh, who have been doing a lifetime of work in San Diego and regarding LGBTQ, and they're still at it, like they're kind of a powerhouse, it seems. And so I'd say that their work is inspirational. They did share some of the, because they did a lot of, I believe, a lot of filming, events at Lambda Archives. And so that's an interesting dynamic and relationship there. And so they shared a few of them with me. And it was really, really powerful. And they are not, basically they are challenging, they're challenging the LGBT community itself. And that's really like powerful. And it's like, it's intense, right? Like being part of a community that is made invisible and is marginalized in different ways, just completely pushed to the margins by like dominant everything. And then challenging though, how we also may be, I guess, in ways that we may be violent ourselves within the community. And so I'd have to say that, their story, just, being, doing documentaries and asking, the hard questions, but also I get a sense from them too, that in doing so, they're also, in community with folks in that space, that they are intentional about, well-being. They're just there, building the community, even though they're challenging it. So, whoa, right? And so that LGBT history, yes, of what they've been doing for the past few decades, but also the LGBT history that they are creating right now, and that work, total inspiration. It's like, no fear. All right. So
Yeah, for sure. And now I'm double checking to see if the website is still up. But they did, a few years back, they did the Transnarative Project as well. And donated those. So a copy of those now lives at the archives as well, those digital oral histories of trans folks in San Diego County and the general region. And those are super powerful. And that gets at a question that I had talked about earlier, which is, figuring out how we, because one of the charges, right, of an archive is of a community empowered archive like Lambda is to tell the full history of the community. And what you were talking about earlier is that the other charge is to tell that history in a way that is actually empowering the community to tell it. So yes, like filling in the gaps of history, like there's not a whole lot at Lambda Archives about the trans community and the history of trans folks in San Diego. And so part of the charge is to fill that gap in the record of history, and doing that without feeling like you're exploiting or using this community to fill the gap of history, and that's it, right? And so I know that's a thing that the archives field as a whole kind of struggles with. So I don't expect you to have this is how you do it. But what is it's kind of like, what is your approach there? Like how do you balance those two things?
Yeah. It's definitely not easy. And so that's the thing. A lot of times and I know that even in this conversation, I refer to communities of color, right? And it's like communities of color don't navigate the world the same. And even folks within a particular community don't navigate, right? So, so part of that approach is to continually learn from that community, but be very intentional about just simply not taking this information and applying it to the archives through my interpretation. Like it's just straight up, I need to learn from folks within that community to understand where they're coming from. And so, to be just perpetually, intentional and be guided by what I'm learning. One of the things that, I'm that's on my basically to-do list in creating this sort of like holistic experience or space for folks when they are able to finally enter the archives again, is like, reimagining or rethinking, questioning, how, sure, there perhaps are materials that document the transgender community, but for visitors, researchers, anyone in the community who identifies as transgender, will you be misgendered within that space? Will, how, what is basically your experience physically in that space? And so it's not just, that's my responsibility is to just, learn what's up. And there's a scholar, and I believe a lawyer, perhaps some of you are familiar with, Dean Spade, who talks about administrative processes and having to deal with that administrative bureaucracy when with medical paperwork, and I know that there's a lot of folks who are talking about that as well. And so it's this ordinary process, or this ordinary mandatory requirement that I'm writing or planning, including in this plan, how will it affect folks? And so it's not easy work, but I mean, it's necessary work. And I just want y'all to know that I'm constantly reflecting and learning for folks who know much better than me and who have that experiential knowledge. Right. And no matter, even if it makes me uncomfortable, it's like, I need to call myself out on my anti-Blackness, it's just, I just want y'all to know that it's not just simply archives, give me your stuff and I'll put it on the shelf.
Yeah. So. Yeah, the process is so much more interactive and accountable than just that, right? And that, and I'm really happy to see Lambda Archives going in this direction, which will hopefully, lead to us ensuring that we have as complete as possible, a complete record, so that we don't get forgotten, we don't get lost in our history. Is the reason Lambda exists and these community-powered archives exist in the first place, is that nobody cares about our stories if they're in a general mainstream archive. They're starting to care because it's trendy to care now. But for the most part, we are the best stewards of our own stories. And we need to make sure, if we're representing the entire LGBTQ community, that we're representing the entire LGBTQ community, right? And a question from Chuck in the Facebook chat that I think is a really good kind of one of our last questions before we close up, which is that I know that Lambda is working with at least a couple of San Diego groups about oral histories, collecting those oral histories. Can you, and I know that project started before you started, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, there's definitely some oral history projects underway. I know that, Kapimeta and the Black Coalition, the Latinx Coalition are doing oral history projects, which when I arrived, or when I first learned about that, I was like, yes, that's so awesome. I'm there. How can I help? Also, I believe the North County LGBT Center is doing an oral history project as well. So it's yes, okay, they'll have oral history projects covered, or at least, right now, it's that's pretty awesome. So yeah, I believe that all of the groups are within the beginning stages of their projects, so from my understanding, they are approaching it in different ways. It's my understanding that the Black LGBTQ coalition is doing it in a way that's like more documentary. And so that's great. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens out of that. And also, if there's anyone part of the coalition that is here with us, really, like I'm here to help. And even if it's like about just talking things out, like if there's any way I can help you, please do not hesitate to reach out. So yeah, y'all, you have to like, I'm pretty sure everyone out there too is looking forward to what happens to these oral history projects.
Yeah, I am. I'm super excited for it. It should be. I'm really excited to see what the ultimate outcome is, especially as I know they were all like getting ready to go, and then pandemic, and so now it all looks a little bit different, as our whole lives all look a little bit different. Just a bit, but I'm really excited that we have this opportunity to. Lambda has created this opportunity for these 3 BIPOC coalitions to like tell their stories and tell the stories of their members. I think that's really powerful and really, really amazing.
Yeah, Lambda Archives,
North County folks who are like, oh no,
yeah, totally.
like loving on the North County folks because I think they often get kind of forgotten when we talk about San Diego, and you know, like they do feel a million miles away, but they are still part of San Diego. They only feel a million miles away because of traffic. But right, like they are actually very close proximity. So I'm really excited to get to incorporate their stories too.
Yeah. I just, like I said, we just arrived here in San Diego. I mean, maybe a little over a month ago, and just I'm completely blown away by like the community, like y'all are so like tight and so collaborative and supportive. I've never seen anything like that. It's amazing. And also part of that is really the board of Lambda Archives. I'm like, what? I cannot be this fortunate, to do this work, to actually, be paid to do this work, to do it through a lens that, is meant to like disrupt and intervene. Wow, I'm very, very happy to be here within the community, be connecting with organizations and folks such as Pride, but also specifically working with the board that I'm working with. I know, again, through words and action that I'll be supported and that I am supported. So, yeah,
that's an amazing place to be. Did you have any last words or last thoughts you wanted to end on?
That's a good, thank you for that. I'd like to just encourage folks to reach out. There might have, I'm as a queer, non-binary person of color, I know how I navigate through, predominantly white cis hetero spaces, or predominantly white spaces. And in terms of archives, again, that representation, I just want you to, like, folks of color to, feel free to reach out and discuss, like, anything. Like, if they are collecting stuff on their own, if you want more information about how I approach this work, anything like that. I'm meant intentionally here to support those concerns. And if you want to call me out on shit, I'm sorry for that labor that that you're going to put on yourself by doing that, but totally do that. Oh, was I not supposed to say that word? Sorry. But yes, you don't have to, worry if you're going to hurt my feelings or anything. So anyway, we tend to just be like, okay, I'm not going to deal with that, blah, blah, blah. But it's my job, and it's just, as a person, I need to be receptive. So, but I'll also add that Jen mentioned that I am an editor for Uproot, which is a media space publication that is explicitly centering and uplifting the work of Black, Indigenous people of color. In fact, one of the main things that we decided to do is to request that people only build, cite on the work of people of color. So what other publication is doing that? It's a challenge, but that's part of the whole entire experience. So, you can reach out to me about that as well.
Yes, I love that. That is that is amazing. I'm looking forward to looking further into Uproot, which now I know the pause in between Uproot. And yeah, I love that. And I love, thank you so much for being here with us. I am really excited for the direction that the archives is going. As the former head archivist, it still has a big piece of my heart, and I'm very grateful that you are holding that big piece of my heart and are responsible for it.
Thank you, Jen.
Yes, the board did a great job in choosing our next archivist. So with that, I am going to close us out. So I also noticed today on the social media that Lambda Archives has a $35,000 matching grant from SICA. And so if you feel so inclined to donate to Lambda Archives, you can always, of course, donate to San Diego Pride as well. Please don't take this as like one or the other. Please go ahead and do both. But Lambda Archives did announce that that matching grant today. So I did want to lift that up and let folks know that if you are to donate some dollars, dollar for dollar, it'll be matched up to $35,000, and that'll help keep this like really vital work going for Lambda. So, so Lambda Archives, as Joyce said, is closed to the public in the physical space for the rest of the year. You can always continue to reach out to them and make sure that they're getting your input. You're welcome to San Diego and to Imperial County or to Baja, California. Lambda Archives does serve all of those spaces. I'm really glad that we were able to highlight our amazing gem of a history organization in San Diego in this LGBTQ History Month, this first day of LGBTQ History Month. We've got 30 more days of history. And then we don't talk about history the rest of the year. That's how that works. I'm just kidding. So thank you for helping us to kick off LGBTQ History Month. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.